Welcome back to Mr. Cursed. Something's been hiding in the Appalachian Mountains for a very long time. Something that watches you, something that learns from you, and worst of all, something that can become you. Tonight, I'm bringing you 7 real encounters with creatures that shouldn't exist. These people saw things in those mountains that changed them forever. Hit subscribe if you dare. Smash that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you survive an encounter like these? Turn off your lights. It's time to begin. I'm 41 years old, and I've been working for Appalachian Electric for 18 years now. Started right out of high school, when my dad got me the job through a friend of his who worked in the office. Back then, I thought I'd do it for maybe 5 years, save up some money, and figure out what I really wanted to do with my life. Funny how time works. Here I am, almost 2 decades later, and I can't imagine doing anything else. Well, I couldn't until what happened up on Pine Ridge Road last summer. My name's Dennis Walker, and my territory covers most of the mountain counties in eastern West Virginia. It's good work, honest work, fixing power lines and checking equipment in places where most people wouldn't want to live. The pay's decent, benefits are solid, and I like being outdoors instead of stuck behind a desk somewhere. My wife Sarah always jokes that I'm part mountain goat, the way I can scramble up those utility poles and navigate the back roads that would make most people nervous. She's probably right. Growing up in these mountains, you learn to read the land, respect it, and work with it instead of against it. Pine Ridge Road is one of those routes that makes other guys in the company grumble when it comes up on their assignment sheet. 20 miles of winding gravel that services maybe a dozen families scattered through some of the most remote wilderness you'll find in West Virginia. The houses are spread so far apart you might drive 10 minutes between mailboxes, and cell service cuts out about halfway up the mountain. It's connected by a single power line that snakes through the trees, following the old logging roads that were cut back in the 1940 seconds. Most of the families up there have been on that mountain for generations. The Hendricks have been farming the same plot since the 1800s. The Morrows run a small sawmill that's been in their family for God knows how long. They're good people, self-sufficient, know how to fix most things themselves, and they don't call for service unless something's genuinely wrong. When you get a call from Pine Ridge, you know it's legitimate. That's why I didn't think twice about the service request that came in on August 22nd. Mrs. Hendricks had called the office to report flickering power at their farm, which sits at the very end of the line, about as far up the mountain as you can drive before the road just stops. Summer storms had been rolling through the area pretty regular that month, and flickering power usually meant a blown transformer or maybe a tree branch that had knocked a line loose. Standard stuff that I could probably fix in under an hour. I loaded up my truck around noon with the usual equipment, spare transformers, fuses, wire, basic tools, and headed up the mountain. It was one of those perfect August days where the humidity finally breaks and you can actually breathe without feeling like you're swimming through the air. Clear blue sky, temperature sitting comfortable, in the low 80 seconds. With just enough breeze to keep the bugs away. The kind of day that makes you grateful to work outside instead of in some office building. The drive up Pine Ridge starts normal enough. First few miles, you pass through what used to be a small community. A handful of houses, an old church that still holds services every Sunday, a general store that's been closed for about 10 years now. After that, the houses spread out and the forest gets thicker. Big old oak and maple trees that have been growing for probably a century, creating a canopy so dense that even on a bright day like that one, the road stays pretty shaded. About halfway up, maybe 8 miles from the main highway, I noticed something walking along the road ahead of me. At first, I figured it was probably one of the local guys heading to check on something, maybe a hunting blind or a property line. People up there walk everywhere, and it's not unusual to see someone hoofing it along the gravel road with a backpack and a walking stick. But as I got closer, slowing down to offer whoever it was a ride, I could see this person was wearing work clothes. Hard hat, safety vest, the kind of gear that utility workers wear. My first thought was that maybe the company had sent another crew up here and forgot to tell me about it. Wouldn't be the first time the office got their wires crossed on scheduling. The guy was tall and thin, probably about my height, and he was carrying what looked like electrical equipment, a toolbox in one hand, some kind of meter in the other. Professional gear, the expensive stuff that the company issues to senior technicians. I slowed down even more, getting ready to roll down my window and see if he needed a ride or if we were supposed to be working together. That's when I got close enough to really see him, and something was wrong. His clothes were too clean. Not just clean, they looked like they'd just come out of the package. The banding, the safety vest, was that bright reflective yellow-green that fades after about a week of actual work. But his looked like he'd just peeled the tags off. Same with the hard hat. White and spotless, without a single ding or scuff mark. In 18 years of doing this job, I've never seen work gear that clean on anyone who actually uses it. I pulled up alongside him, maybe 20 feet away, and rolled down my window. That's when he turned to face my truck. And I saw that he didn't have a face. I mean that literally. Where his face should have been, there was just smooth skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just blank flesh the color of old paper. Like someone had started making a person and forgot to finish the most important part. I hit the brakes harder than I meant to, and my truck stopped with a little jerk that made the equipment rattle in the back. I just sat there, engine running, staring at this thing that looked like a utility worker but had no face. It stood perfectly still, holding its tools, hard hat reflecting the sunlight that filtered through the trees. For maybe 30 seconds, we stayed like that. Me and my truck, with my mouth hanging open, this thing standing on the gravel road like it was waiting for a bus. The forest was completely quiet. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just the rumble of my truck's engine and the sound of my own breathing, which was getting faster and shallower by the second. Then its face started to appear. I watched features emerge like someone was drawing them on with invisible ink. First, 2 dark spots where eyes should be, gradually taking shape and gaining detail. Then the outline of a nose, slowly filling in with texture and shadow. A mouth appeared last, starting as just a thin line and then developing lips, teeth, even the little lines and imperfections that make a mouth look real. When the process was finished, maybe 20 seconds later, I was looking at my own face. Not similar to my face. Not someone who looked like me. My actual face, complete with the beard I'd been growing for the past year, the little scar on my forehead from when a tree branch whipped back and caught me during a repair job, even the age lines around my eyes that Sarah always teases me about. Every detail was perfect, like looking in a mirror. The thing wearing my face smiled at me and raised its hand in a little wave, the kind of casual greeting you'd give to a neighbor. Then it started walking toward my truck with steps that didn't look quite right. Too mechanical, too precise, like each foot was being placed exactly where it was supposed to go, without any of the natural variation that comes from walking on uneven gravel. I threw the truck into reverse and backed up as fast as I dared on that narrow road. The thing kept walking toward me, matching my speed somehow, even though its pace didn't change. Those mechanical steps just kept coming, and it kept wearing my face with that pleasant, neighborly smile. I found a wide spot in the road where I could turn around, spun the truck in a cloud of gravel and dust, and drove back toward town faster than I probably should have on those mountain curves. In my rearview mirror, I could see it standing in the road where I'd left it, watching my truck disappear around the bend. Then it started taking off its safety vest, like it was changing clothes for a different job. Back in town, I called my supervisor, Bill Morrison, and reported seeing someone in company gear on Pine Ridge Road. Bill's been with Appalachian Electric for 30 years. He's seen everything and doesn't get rattled easily. But when I tried to describe what I'd encountered, he got quiet on the other end of the line. "Dennis," he said finally, "you feeling okay? Maybe you should take the rest of the day off. Get some rest." I told him I was fine, just wanted to know if another crew had been assigned to Pine Ridge without my knowledge. He assured me that no other workers were scheduled for that area. When I pressed him about it, insisting I'd seen someone in full company gear with professional equipment, he suggested I might have seen one of the locals who'd bought surplus safety equipment at an auction. That didn't explain the face situation, obviously, but I wasn't about to get into that with my supervisor. Bill's a good guy. But I saw a faceless person who grew my face. Isn't the kind of thing that helps your career in the utility business. I insisted on completing the service call. Mrs. Hendricks was expecting me, and I wasn't about to let some weird encounter keep me from doing my job. Bill agreed to send Miguel Rodriguez with me, partly for backup, partly because I think he was worried I might be having some kind of breakdown. Miguel and I have worked together for about 8 years. He's solid, reliable, and doesn't spook easily. If anyone could help me figure out what I'd really seen up there, it would be him. We loaded up my truck with fresh equipment and headed back up Pine Ridge Road around 2 o'clock. This time, the road was empty. No faceless utility workers, no one in safety gear, nothing but the usual mountain scenery and gravel crunching under our tires. Miguel asked me to describe what I'd seen earlier, and I gave him the basic version: someone in company gear who looked wrong somehow. I didn't mention the face situation, not yet. When we reached the Hendricks farm, Tom Hendricks came out to meet us with a confused look on his weathered face. He's a man in his 60s who's lived on that mountain his whole life, raised 4 kids there, buried his parents in the family cemetery about a quarter-mile up the ridge. He knows everyone in these mountains and doesn't get surprised by much. "Dennis," he said, looking from me to Miguel and back again, "didn't you already fix our power problem?" I told him this was my first time up there today, but he shook his head. "No, you were here about an hour ago. Fixed everything in maybe 10 minutes. Fastest repair work I've ever seen." Miguel and I looked at each other. An hour ago, we'd been back in town, talking to Bill about what I'd encountered on my first trip up. Tom described how I had arrived in a utility truck similar to mine, wearing the same company uniform, carrying professional equipment. He'd watched me work on the electrical panel behind his house, replacing some components with unusual efficiency. The whole job had taken less than 10 minutes, compared to the hour or 2 that most electrical repairs usually required. "You were polite enough," Tom continued, "but kind of strange. Never made eye contact, spoke in this flat voice like you were reading from a script, and you never smiled or made small talk like you usually do." Miguel and I walked around to the electrical panel to see what had been done. The repair work was perfect, better than anything I could have accomplished. Every connection was clean and tight, the components were properly labeled, and the entire system looked like it had been serviced by someone with decades more experience than I had. But the repair used techniques and materials that Appalachian Electric hadn't used in over 20 years. The fuses were an older type that the company had phased out in the early 2000s. The wiring method was something I recognized from training manuals but had never actually seen implemented in the field. Everything worked perfectly, but it was all wrong for modern repair standards. We drove back down Pine Ridge Road slowly, both of us scanning the forest and road edges for any sign of another utility worker. About 2 miles down from the Hendricks place, Miguel grabbed my arm and pointed ahead. "There," he said quietly, working on that transformer. Through my windshield, I could see someone in utility gear working on a transformer that served the Morrow family's sawmill. From that distance, it looked like me. Same height and build, same style of uniform, same confident way of moving around electrical equipment. Miguel pulled out his binoculars from the glove compartment, and we watched this thing work. It moved with mechanical precision, never pausing to check references or think through the next step. Every motion was deliberate and exact, like it was following a program instead of making decisions. In 15 minutes, it completed what should have been at least an hour of complex repair work, then packed its tools and walked directly into the forest without following any path or trail. We drove to the transformer and examined the work. Like at the Hendricks place, the repair was flawless but used outdated methods and equipment. The transformer had been upgraded with components that were decades ahead of anything we used in the field. Newer technology that I'd only seen in trade magazines and equipment catalogs. Miguel and I didn't talk much on the drive back to town. What was there to say? We'd both seen something that didn't make sense, something that was doing my job better than I could do it myself. Over the following weeks, we started getting reports from customers all along Pine Ridge Road about electrical problems that were being fixed before they could call them in. People would wake up to find that power outages they didn't know they'd had were already resolved. Mrs. Patterson called to thank me for preventing what could have been a dangerous electrical fire in her barn, even though I'd never been to her property. The thing was somehow predicting electrical failures before they happened. Circuit breakers that were getting ready to fail would be replaced the night before they went bad. Power lines that were developing stress fractures would be repaired before they could snap in the wind. It was preventing problems that wouldn't have become apparent for days or weeks. I started getting credit for repair work I'd never done. My efficiency ratings shot through the roof. making me look like the best utility worker in the company's history. Bill Morrison pulled me aside one afternoon to ask how I'd managed to improve my response times and repair quality so dramatically. Miguel and I tried to track down the duplicate dentist several times. We'd get reports of electrical work being done on Pine Ridge Road and race up there, but the thing seemed to know our schedules. It would finish its work and disappear into the forest just minutes before we arrived, leaving behind perfect repairs and confused customers who swore they'd just talked to me. 3 months later, in November, I encountered it again during what turned out to be the worst storm eastern West Virginia had seen in years. 60-mile-per-hour winds, driving rain, and power outages throughout 3 counties. I was working double shifts trying to restore service, and the company had called in crews from 2 other regions to help with the mover. Emergency response. I was driving up Pine Ridge Road to check on a major transmission line that served the entire upper valley when I saw something that made me pull over and just stare. The duplicate dentist was hanging from power cables in 60-mile-per-hour winds, repairing storm damage as fast as it occurred. While other utility workers throughout the region were waiting for the storm to pass before attempting any repairs, this thing was working through conditions that should have been fatal for any human being. I watched through my windshield as it swung from cable to cable, replacing damaged insulators and splicing broken lines with impossible speed and precision. Every time the wind would snap a power line or blow a transformer, it was there within minutes to fix the problem. It worked for 18 straight hours without taking a break, maintaining electrical service for every customer on Pine Ridge Road, while the rest of the county sat in darkness. When the storm finally passed the next morning, I tried to approach it. I parked my truck at the base of a utility pole it was working on and got out, intending to finally confront this thing that had been doing my job better than I could. It climbed down from the pole with smooth, practiced motions and walked directly to me. When it got close enough, it smiled with my face and handed me a repair report. The paperwork documented electrical improvements throughout the entire Pine Ridge area that would have taken a full crew months to complete. Every item was signed with my name and employee number, but I had no memory of doing any of it. My supervisor gave me a commendation for exceptional storm response. According to the official records, I had single-handedly maintained power service for an entire mountain community through the worst weather event in decades. The local newspaper ran a story about my dedication and skill. I got letters from customers thanking me for risking my life to keep their electricity on, all for work I'd never done. Looking back now, I think I understand what was happening. The duplicate dentist wasn't trying to replace me or hurt anyone. It was just better at my job than I was, more efficient, more skilled, more dedicated. It could predict problems before they occurred, work in conditions that would kill a normal person, and complete repairs with a level of precision that I couldn't match after 18 years of experience. I realized I had 2 choices: fight it or accept it. I chose to accept it. Now I let it handle the difficult repairs on Pine Ridge Road while I focus on easier assignments closer to town. Customers prefer the duplicate dentist anyway. It's faster, more reliable, and never charges overtime. My work life has become significantly easier, and Pine Ridge Road has the most dependable power service in the state. Sometimes I wonder if I should be worried about being replaced entirely. But honestly, the thing seems content to work the mountain routes that other guys don't want anyway. It's never tried to expand beyond Pine Ridge Road, never attempted to take over my easier assignments in town. It just does the hard work that needs doing, better than any human could do it. I still see it occasionally when I drive up to check on things. It always waves with my face and goes back to its work. We've developed an understanding of sorts. I stay in town, it handles the mountain. My marriage is better because I'm home more often. My stress levels are lower because I'm not dealing with the most challenging repair work anymore. My performance reviews are excellent thanks to work I'm getting credit for, but didn't actually do. I've never told Sarah about any of this. How do you explain that something with no face grew your face and is now doing your job better than you ever could? She just thinks I've gotten really good at my work lately. She's proud of all the recognition I've been getting from the company. To this day, Pine Ridge Road has never had a major power outage. Even during ice storms that knock out electricity throughout the region, those dozen families scattered across 20 miles of mountain wilderness never lose power for more than a few minutes. Something is up there in the forest, wearing my face and my uniform, making sure their lights stay on. I don't know what it is or where it came from. I don't know if there are others like it in different places, doing different jobs. All I know is that it's better at being me than I am, and somehow, that's okay. I'm 41 years old, I work for Appalachian Electric, and I have the strangest job-sharing arrangement in the history of the utility industry. I just hope it never decides that it doesn't need me at all. I'm 26 years old, and I've been delivering food for DoorDash and Uber Eats around Morgantown, West Virginia, for about 3 years now. Most drivers stick to the city and close suburbs because the pay is steady, and you don't have to worry about getting lost or your car breaking down on some back road. But I've always been willing to drive out to the rural areas, the mountain communities, and hollow settlements where a lot of other drivers won't go. The tips are usually better out there, and honestly, I kind of enjoy the drive. There's something peaceful about winding through those hills, even if the cell service is spotty and some of the roads aren't much more than gravel paths. I grew up in Charleston, but I moved up to Morgantown for college and just never left. The gig economy works pretty well here, between the university students who order constantly and the rural folks who really appreciate delivery service. I can make decent money if I'm smart about it. My apartment is nothing fancy, but it's mine. And I like being my own boss. Most of the mountain people I deliver to are really nice, just folks who live a little further out and don't want to drive into town for dinner. Some of them are elderly and can't get around easily. Others just work long hours and want the convenience. I've gotten to know a lot of them over the years. There's Mrs. Patterson, who always orders from the same Chinese place and tips $20 every time. And the Miller family, who runs a small farm and orders pizza for their kids every Friday night. The thing about delivering to the mountains is that you have to know the area. GPS will get you close, but a lot of these addresses don't show up right on the maps, and some of the roads have changed over the years. You learn to read mailboxes, look for landmarks, and sometimes you just have to call the customer and have them talk you in. The cell service cuts out in certain valleys, so you learn which areas are dead zones. Try to get your bearings before you lose signal. I keep a paper map in my car as backup, though I've only had to use it a couple times. Miller's Hollow is about 30 minutes outside of town, depending on traffic and which route you take. It's this narrow valley with maybe 15 houses and trailers scattered along both sides of a creek. The road follows the water, and in some places during heavy rain, you're basically driving through the creek bed. Most of the buildings are older, some dating back to the 1942 or 52. Others are newer mobile homes that families moved in when they needed more space. It's the kind of place where 3 generations might live on the same piece of land, just in different houses. The people are friendly enough, though some of them keep to themselves. I'd been delivering out there maybe once or twice a month for the past year. November 8th started out like any other Thursday. I'd been doing deliveries since around 4 p.m., mostly to apartments near campus and a few suburban neighborhoods. Around 7:30, I got a ping for Chinese food. $47 worth from Golden Dragon, which is this place downtown that's actually pretty good. The delivery address was 2847 Miller's Hollow Road, which I recognized as being pretty far back in the hollow. The customer name showed up as A. Rodriguez, and there was a note to call when I arrived since the address might be hard to find. I thought it was weird that someone had the same last name as me, but Rodriguez isn't exactly uncommon, and I figured it was just a coincidence. The tip looked decent, $8 on top of the delivery fee, so I accepted the order and headed to the restaurant. Golden Dragon is usually pretty quick, and they had the order ready when I got there. 3 containers of different entrees, fried rice, spring rolls, and hot and sour soup. Enough food for a family dinner. The drive out to Miller's Hollow was normal at first. I took Route 7 south out of town, then turned onto the county road that winds up into the hills. The sun was already setting, and by the time I reached the turnoff for Miller's Hollow Road, it was getting properly dark. The temperature had dropped probably 15 degrees since I left town, and I could see my breath when I cracked the window to check the mailbox numbers. Miller's Hollow Road isn't really a road in the normal sense. It's more like a 1-lane gravel path that follows Miller's Creek through the valley. There are no streetlights, obviously, and the houses are spread out with maybe a quarter-mile or more between them. Some have porch lights or yard lights, others are just dark shapes in the woods. The numbers on the mailboxes go in order most of the way, but there are gaps where houses used to be or where the numbering just doesn't make sense. I found 2,847, about 2 miles back into the hollow. It was a single-wide trailer, probably from the 1,982nd, sitting up on a small rise about 50 yards back from the road. There were Christmas lights hanging off the roof, but they looked old and faded, like they'd been there for years. A few of the bulbs were still working, giving off this dim, yellowish light that barely illuminated the front of the trailer. There was a beat-up sedan parked next to it, and a gravel driveway that was mostly just 2 tire tracks through the weeds. I parked next to the sedan and grabbed the food bags from my back seat. The air was cold and still, no wind, no sound except for the creek running somewhere behind the house and my footsteps on the gravel. I walked up to the front door and knocked, holding the bags and trying to get my phone ready to show the order details. The door opened after about 30 seconds, and a woman in her early 50s looked out at me. She was wearing a bathrobe and slippers, and she looked confused, like she'd been sleeping or watching TV and wasn't expecting anyone. She was average height, with graying brown hair and the kind of weathered face you see on people who've lived in the mountains their whole lives. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking at the food bags in my hands. "Hi, I'm Ashley from DoorDash. I have a delivery for A. Rodriguez." I showed her my phone with the order details. She frowned and shook her head. "I didn't order any food, and I don't have money for something like that anyway." She looked at the bags again. "You sure you got the right address?" I checked my app again. It definitely showed 2,847 Millers Hollow Road, and the GPS had brought me right here. "The order was placed about an hour ago for this address. Maybe someone else in your family ordered it?" "I live alone," she said, "and my name's not Rodriguez, it's Patterson." She paused and looked at me more closely. "What did you say your name was?" "Ashley Rodriguez." Her expression changed to something I couldn't quite read. "That's strange. The order was for A. Rodriguez, and you're A. Rodriguez?" "Yeah, I thought it was weird too, but it happens sometimes. People have the same name." I was starting to feel a little awkward standing on her porch. Maybe I should call the customer and see if they gave the wrong address. She was quiet for a moment, then stepped back and gestured for me to come inside. "Why don't you come in for a minute and we'll figure this out? It's cold out there, and you shouldn't be standing around in the dark with all that food." I hesitated. I don't usually go inside customers' houses, but it was cold, and she seemed nice enough. Plus, I needed to figure out what was going on with this order before I drove all the way back to town. I stepped inside, and she closed the door behind me. The living room was strange. There was no furniture, except for an old recliner in one corner and a small TV on a plastic table. The rest of the room was empty, but there were beer bottles everywhere. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, just sitting on the floor in groups. Some were empty, some still had beer in them, but they were arranged in these weird patterns across the room, like someone had been organizing them. "Sorry about the mess," she said, noticing me looking around. "I've been collecting them for recycling." I nodded, though it seemed like a lot more bottles than one person could drink, and they were arranged too neatly to just be trash waiting to go out. "Do you have a phone I could use? I should try calling the customer." "Sure, let me find it." She started looking around the room, moving some of the bottles aside. "I know it's here somewhere." While she was searching, I heard something from the back of the trailer. A voice calling out, "Ashley, I'm back here, bring the food." It was my voice. Not similar to my voice, not someone who sounded like me. It was exactly my voice. With the same accent, the same inflection, everything. I felt my stomach drop, and I looked at the woman to see if she'd heard it too. She looked up from where she was searching and called back toward the hallway. "Ashley? There's another Ashley here with your food." The voice from the bedroom replied immediately. "I know, that's my sister. Send her back here." "I don't have a sister. I'm an only child, and I definitely wasn't in that back bedroom." But the woman seemed to accept this explanation without question. She smiled at me and pointed down a narrow hallway that led toward the back of the trailer. "Your sister's waiting for you in the back room," she said. "She's been here for about an hour, said she was expecting food delivery. I wanted to tell her that I didn't have a sister, that something was very wrong here, but the words wouldn't come out. I just stood there holding the food bags, trying to understand what was happening. The logical part of my mind was trying to come up with explanations. Maybe it was someone playing a prank. Maybe there really was another Ashley Rodriguez who looked like me. Maybe I was having some kind of breakdown. "Go ahead," the woman said, still smiling. "She's been waiting for you." I walked down the hallway, carrying the food. The hallway was narrow and dark, with thin walls that felt flimsy under my free hand. There were 3 doors, a bathroom, a bedroom that looked empty, and another bedroom at the very back with the door closed. Light was coming from under the closed door, and I could hear movement inside. As I got closer to the door, my voice called out again, "Come in, Ashley. I've been waiting for you." I stopped in front of the door. Every instinct I had was telling me not to open it, to turn around and leave, to get out of that trailer as fast as possible. But I needed to know what was happening. I needed to see who or what was using my voice. I turned the doorknob and opened the door. Sitting on a mattress on the floor was me. Not someone who looked like me, not a twin I didn't know about. It was me, exactly as I looked, wearing the same black jeans, same red DoorDash t-shirt, same winter jacket. She even had the same delivery bag slung over her shoulder and the same phone case. When she smiled at me, it was my smile, my teeth, even the small scar on my upper lip that I got when I fell off my bike as a kid. "Thanks for bringing dinner," she said in my voice. I was getting so hungry. I couldn't speak. I just stared at her, trying to process what I was seeing. She looked perfect, every detail exactly right, down to the way she sat and the expression on her face. But there was something wrong with her eyes. They were my eyes, the same brown color, the same shape, but they were empty. Like someone had taken a photograph of my eyes and pasted them onto her face. "What are you?" I finally managed to ask. She tilted her head like she didn't understand the question. "I'm Ashley Rodriguez," she said. "I deliver food in Miller's Hollow, just like you." The thing that looked like me stood up, and I noticed immediately that her movement was wrong. Too smooth, too fluid, like she was floating instead of walking. There was no weight to her steps, no normal awkwardness when she adjusted her balance. She moved like water, like she wasn't bound by the same physics as everything else. She reached for the food bags, and when her fingers touched mine, they were cold. Not just cool, but actually cold, like touching meat that had been in the refrigerator. I jerked my hands back and dropped one of the bags. "How do you know my name?" I asked, backing toward the door. "How do you know where I work?" She smiled again, and this time I could see that her teeth were too white, too perfect. "I've been watching you drive these roads for months," she said, "learning how you talk, how you move. It's taken me a long time to get it right." The duplicate, Ashley picked up the dropped food bag and opened one of the containers. Inside was sweet and sour chicken, but instead of using the plastic fork, she started eating with her hands, tearing at the food like an animal. She ate fast, desperately, cramming chunks of chicken and rice into her mouth. Sauce dripped down her chin, but she didn't seem to care. She finished the first container in less than a minute, then moved on to the second. Orange beef, eaten the same way, handfuls of meat and vegetables shoveled into her mouth. She crunched through the bones like they were crackers, chewing and swallowing everything without chewing properly. The third container was lo mein noodles, which she grabbed in fistfuls and stuffed into her mouth. Noodles hung from her lips as she chewed, and she made these wet, satisfied sounds like an animal feeding. In less than 2 minutes, she had eaten all 3 entrees, the fried rice, the spring rolls, and even drunk the soup straight from the container. When she was finished, she looked at me with sauce and bits of food around her mouth. "I needed to understand what food tastes like, I said. "For when I take over your deliveries." I ran. I turned around and sprinted down the hallway, past the empty room, past the bathroom, into the living room where the woman was still looking for her phone among the beer bottles. She looked up as I headed for the door. "Which Ashley are you?" she asked, looking confused. "The one who brought the food or the one who lives here?" "I'm the real Ashley," I said, fumbling with the door handle. "I don't know what that thing is, but it's not me." "That's strange," the woman said. "The other one has been delivering food to Miller's Hollow for weeks now. She's really nice, always on time. All the neighbors love her." I got the door open and ran to my car. As I started the engine, I looked back at the trailer and saw the duplicate Ashley standing in the doorway, waving goodbye with my hand, wearing my face, using my smile. She looked exactly like me, but the wrongness of her was so obvious now that I couldn't believe I hadn't seen it immediately. I drove out of Miller's Hollow faster than I should have on that gravel road, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds to make sure nothing was following me. By the time I reached the main road, I was shaking so hard I had to pull over and sit in a gas station parking lot for 20 minutes before I felt steady enough to drive home. When I got back to my apartment, I opened the DoorDash app to report the incident, though I had no idea how I was going to explain what had happened. But when I looked at my delivery history, I saw dozens of completed deliveries to Miller's Hollow that I had never made. Orders to addresses I'd never been to, marked as delivered with 5-star customer ratings. The reviews were all positive. Ashley always knows exactly what we want. She's the best delivery driver we've ever had. So friendly and reliable. Ashley has been taking care of our family for months. According to the app, I had been delivering to Miller's Hollow 3 or 4 times a week for the past 6 months. Perfect ratings, excellent tips, glowing reviews from customers I'd never met. But I had only been to the Hollow maybe 10 times total in the past year. I called DoorDash support and tried to explain that someone was using my identity to make deliveries, but the customer service representative said my account showed normal activity with excellent performance. They congratulated me on my high ratings and said there were no flags or issues with my account. Over the next week, weird things kept happening. I'd get orders for Miller's Hollow, but when I tried to decline them, the app would show that I had already accepted and completed the delivery. Customers around town started recognizing me, thanking me for deliveries I'd never made to addresses I'd never been to. People would wave at me on the street and say things like, "Thanks for bringing dinner last week," or, "You're the best delivery driver we've ever had." The duplicate Ashley was building a reputation I didn't earn. According to my app statistics, my efficiency rating had doubled. My customer satisfaction was perfect, and I was earning bonuses for exceptional service. The algorithm started sending me more and better orders because my performance metrics were so good. Then the messages started coming from both DoorDash and Uber Eats. Congratulations on my improved performance. Praise for my increased delivery speed and customer satisfaction. According to their records, I was completing twice as many deliveries as before, with perfect ratings across the board and no customer complaints. I realized that the duplicate was actually making me look like the best delivery driver in the area. My income had increased significantly because of the bonuses and better order assignments. I was earning money from deliveries I never made, getting credit for work I never did. I tried to fight it at first. I called customer support multiple times, tried to explain what was happening, but they just saw my account performing exceptionally well. From their perspective, I had gone from being an average driver to being one of their best, and they weren't going to investigate that kind of success. After a few weeks, I realized something else was happening. I wasn't getting any orders for the dangerous mountain roads anymore. All my deliveries were staying in town, in safe neighborhoods with good lighting and reliable cell service. The duplicate Ashley was handling all the risky mountain deliveries, the ones that required driving on narrow gravel roads in bad weather, delivering to isolated houses where anything could happen. My work life had actually never been better. I was making more money, working safer routes, and getting praise from both the apps and the customers. The thing in Miller's Hollow was doing the dangerous work that I had always taken on out of necessity, and doing it better than I ever could. I still don't know what that thing was or where it came from. I never went back to Miller's Hollow to find out. But according to the people who live there, Ashley Rodriguez is the best delivery driver they've ever had. She knows exactly what they want, she's always on time, and she never complains about the difficult roads or the isolated addresses. Sometimes I wonder if I should be worried about being replaced entirely. But honestly, I can't complain about the arrangement. I make more money now, I never have to drive dangerous mountain roads in bad weather, and my stress levels are way lower. The duplicate Ashley handles all the difficult customers and risky deliveries, and apparently she's better at customer service than I ever was. I've thought about trying to contact her, maybe driving back out to Miller's Hollow to confront her again, but I'm not sure what that would accomplish. She's not hurting anyone, as far as I can tell. She's just doing my job better than I can do it, in places I don't want to go anyway. Looking back now, I think maybe Miller's Hollow needed its own delivery driver. Something that understood the mountain roads and the people who live there. Something that could navigate the narrow valleys and the dead cell phone zones without getting lost or scared. And for whatever reason, it chose to look like me. I just hope it never decides it wants my whole life instead of just the delivery routes. I'm 52 years old, and I've been driving school buses for the past 15 years here in the mountains of Southwest Virginia, right near the Tennessee border. Been married to Linda for 28 years now, got 2 kids of my own who've long since grown up and moved away. The work suits me fine. I like the routine, the kids mostly behave themselves, and the pay's decent enough to keep us comfortable in our little house outside of town. My name's Tommy Mitchell, by the way. I've lived in these mountains my whole life, born and raised in a holler about 10 miles from where I work now. My daddy was a coal miner, his daddy before him, but by the time I came of age, most of the mines were closing down. Lucky for me, the county was expanding their school bus program right when I got out of high school, needed drivers who knew these winding mountain roads like the back of their hand. I've been doing it ever since, and honestly, I can't imagine doing anything else. The thing about driving a school bus in mountain country is that you're not just following some simple route through neighborhoods and subdivisions. My route covers some pretty remote areas, picking up kids from farms and hollows where families have been living for generations, places where the road turns to gravel and then to dirt before it reaches their front door. Some of these families, their kids are the first generation to even ride a school bus. Used to be, they just walked to the one-room schoolhouse down in the valley, but those days are long gone. Route 15 is my afternoon run, and it takes me down Copper Creek Road every day around 3:30. That road is something else. 12 miles of narrow mountain highway that winds through some of the thickest forest you'll ever see. The state keeps talking about widening it, putting up more guardrails, but you know how that goes. Always next year's budget, always next year's priority. Meanwhile, us locals just take our time and know when to pull over for oncoming traffic. The road follows an old creek bed, which means it curves and dips and rises in ways that don't make sense unless you understand the lay of the land. There's spots where the trees grow so thick overhead that even on the brightest summer day, you're driving through what feels like twilight. In winter, when the leaves are off the trees, you can see back into the hollows where old homesteads used to be, stone foundations and rusted tin roofs marking where families carved out their lives 100 years ago. I've always felt comfortable on that road. Had to. When you're responsible for 30-some kids every afternoon, you learn every pothole, every blind curve, every place where deer like to cross. Miller's Curve is about halfway through the route, a sharp left turn that comes up fast after a long straight stretch. The county finally put up some warning signs a few years back after a couple of accidents, but locals know to slow down there, whether there's signs or not. The kids I drive are good kids, mostly. Farm kids, raised to be respectful and responsible. They help each other with homework on the long rides, look out for the younger ones, don't give me much trouble beyond the usual chatter and excitement. Some of them I've been driving for years. Watched them grow from kindergartners who could barely climb the steps to high schoolers who tower over me. Their families know me, trust me with their most precious cargo every day. Linda always says I'm too attached to the job, that I worry about those kids like they're my own. She's probably right. But when you spend that much time with them, when you know which ones are having trouble at home, which ones are struggling in school, which ones light up when they talk about their 4-H projects or their hunting dogs, well, you can't help but care. That's just how it is in small communities like ours. March 8th started like any other Thursday. I'd finished my morning route, spent the day doing some maintenance on the bus, grabbed lunch at the diner in town. Weather was decent for early spring, not quite warm enough for short sleeves. But the last of the winter snow had melted off, and you could smell that earthy smell of things starting to wake up after a long winter. The kind of day that makes you glad to be alive and working outdoors. My afternoon pickup went smooth as always. 35 kids that day, which was about average. The younger ones were excited about something their teacher had told them about butterflies migrating through the area, and the older ones were complaining about some test they had coming up. Normal kid stuff. I was feeling good. looking forward to getting home to Linda's pot roast. I'd made all my regular stops, dropping off kids at their driveways and lane ends, working my way deeper into the backcountry toward the last few stops on Copper Creek Road. The bus was getting quieter as more kids got off, down to maybe a dozen or so by the time I was approaching Miller's Curve. That's when everything changed. I came around that bend at my usual careful speed, maybe 25 miles per hour, and had to slam on my brakes so hard that I heard the kids yelp behind me. Standing right in the middle of the road, blocking my path completely, was what looked like a crossing guard. At first glance, anyway, the figure was wearing one of those bright orange safety vests, the kind with the reflective strips that highway workers use, and it was holding up a red octagonal stop sign. Standard crossing guard equipment, except for two things that made my stomach drop. First, we were miles from any school or crosswalk, deep in the forest where no crossing guard had any business being. Second, this figure was tall. Not just tall, I'm talking 7 feet at least, maybe more. I sat there with my foot on the brake, engine idling, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The Indrasi figure just stood there, perfectly still, holding that stop sign up like it was the most natural thing in the world. I honked my horn, a polite little toot at first, thinking maybe it was some kind of road construction I hadn't heard about. County sometimes did surprise maintenance without much notice. But the figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge my horn at all. Just kept standing there, that stop sign held high, staring straight at my bus. The kids were starting to get restless behind me, asking why we'd stopped, if everything was okay. I told them to stay in their seats and keep quiet while I figured out what was going on. Looking through my windshield, I got a better view of the figure's face under that bright orange hard hat. What I saw made my hands start shaking on the steering wheel. The skin was pale gray, waxy looking, like something that had been underwater too long. And the eyes, Jesus, the eyes were too big for the head, black and shiny like a bird's eyes, but wrong somehow. They seemed to be studying the bus, moving from window to window like it was counting the children inside. The arm holding the stop sign was too long, stretched out like someone had taken a normal person's arm and added an extra joint or two. The proportions were all wrong, like a drawing of a person done by someone who'd only heard people described but never actually seen one. I tried my radio to contact dispatch, see if they knew about any road work or special activity on my route. Nothing but static, which was strange because I usually had good signal on that stretch of road. Tried my cell phone too, same thing, no signal at all, which wasn't unusual in the deep mountains, but I could have sworn I'd had bars just a few minutes earlier. We sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only 5 minutes, maybe less. The figure never moved, never blinked, just kept holding that stop sign and staring at us with those two big eyes. Some of the kids were starting to whisper questions I couldn't answer. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure slowly walked to the side of the road and gestured for me to proceed. I didn't need to be told twice. I eased off the brake and drove past as quickly as I dared, trying not to look too closely at the thing standing just feet from my window, but I couldn't help stealing a glance in my side mirror as we passed. The figure had turned to watch us go, and I saw its neck rotate further than any human neck should be able to turn, almost completely around like an owl. In my mirror, I watched it step back into the road behind us and resume its position with that stop sign, like it was waiting for the next vehicle that might never come. I dropped off the remaining kids without saying much about what had happened. Kids see things differently than adults. They were excited about the tall man with the sign, thought it was cool rather than terrifying. When I got back to the depot, I filled out an incident report and told my supervisor what I'd seen. He listened with a straight face, made some notes, and said he'd check with county maintenance about any scheduled road work. Next day, he called me into his office and said there was no road work scheduled on my route. Hadn't been for months. He asked if I'd been feeling okay, if I needed some time off. I told him I felt fine, that I knew what I'd seen. He just nodded and said to let him know if anything else unusual happened. The following Thursday, same time, same place, there it was again. Standing in the exact same spot on Copper Creek Road, that tall figure in its orange safety vest and hard hat, holding up its red stop sign like it owned the place. This time, I got a better look at the safety vest. Those reflective strips weren't just reflecting sunlight, they seemed to be glowing on their own, pulsing softly even in the afternoon daylight. The hard hat was too big for its head, sitting crooked, and I could see more of that gray, waxy skin underneath. The thing's face was expressionless, blank, but those oversized eyes tracked every movement of my bus. Again, it held up the stop sign for several minutes, studying my bus and the children inside with what felt like scientific curiosity. Again, my radio and phone went dead. Again, it eventually gestured for me to proceed and watched us drive away with that impossible neck rotation. By the third week, I was prepared. I brought along my old Polaroid camera, the one Linda used for family photos before we got our digital one. Figured, if I could get some pictures, I'd have proof of what was happening. When the crossing guard appeared again, and it did, right on schedule, I managed to snap several photos through my windshield while we waited. I was excited about those pictures, figured they'd finally show my supervisor and anyone else who'd listen that I wasn't losing my mind. But when I got them developed the next day, every single image showed nothing but an empty road. Clear as day. The asphalt, the yellow lines, the forest on both sides. But no crossing guard, no figure, nothing unusual at all. But the kids saw it too. They'd started calling it the tall man with the sign. And some of them began asking if we could take a different route home. They weren't scared exactly, not the way adults would be, but they sensed something wasn't right about our weekly encounters with the impossible crossing guard. I contacted the sheriff's department, spoke with Deputy Williams, who'd grown up in these mountains same as me. He listened to my story, took some notes, and promised to increase patrols on Copper Creek Road. A few days later, he called me back and said he'd driven that road a dozen times at various hours and never seen anyone matching my description. March 29th brought something new. The crossing guard appeared right on schedule, but this time it was holding a different sign, one that read, "Children Crossing," in bold black letters on a bright yellow background. As we sat there, I noticed movement in the forest on both sides of the road. More tall figures in orange safety vests were emerging from the trees, carrying various pieces of road equipment and safety signs. They filed out in single file, at least a dozen of them, all with that same wrong-proportioned appearance and waxy gray skin. Some carried reflective cones, others held flags or additional signs. They lined up along both sides of the road like they were forming some kind of safety corridor, a gauntlet we'd have to drive through. That's when I saw the children. Small, pale figures began crossing the road in the middle of the safety formation. They moved with jerky, puppet-like motions, their arms and legs bending at slightly wrong angles. Like the tall guards, their skin was that same unnatural gray color. But there was something else wrong with them. They were following perfect safety procedures, looking both ways, staying in formation, crossing in an orderly line, but their movements were mechanical, rehearsed, like actors who'd memorized their blocking but didn't understand the play. I realized I was watching some kind of twisted safety drill, where inhuman entities were playing out roles they'd observed but didn't truly comprehend. The tall guards watched over their charges with protective attention, making sure each small figure followed proper road crossing protocol. It was a parody of safety, a nightmare version of everything I'd been trained to care about in my job. The original crossing guard, the one I'd been seeing for weeks, stood at attention and gave me a formal gesture to proceed. As I drove slowly forward through their formation, the child figures scattered back into the forest like startled deer. Through my side mirrors, I watched the tall guards file back into the woods in their orderly fashion, carrying their equipment and signs as if clocking out after a shift. I called in sick the next day, couldn't face driving that route again. But my substitute driver, Jim Phillips, reported seeing the exact same thing at the exact same time. Same tall crossing guard, same impossible height, same orange safety equipment. Jim's been driving buses almost as long as I have, not the type to make things up or see things that aren't there. That weekend, I spent hours at the county library, digging through old newspapers and records, trying to find some explanation for what was happening on Copper Creek Road. What I found changed everything I thought I knew about that stretch of highway, the 15th of April, 1987. A school bus carrying 23 children had gone off the road at Miller's Curve during a spring rainstorm. The bus had slid off the wet pavement, crashed through the flimsy guardrail, and rolled down the steep embankment into Copper Creek. Everyone aboard was killed, 23 kids and their driver, a woman named Sarah Henderson, who'd been driving that route for only 2 months. The accident report blamed poor visibility and inadequate safety signage on that dangerous curve. The families sued the county, demanded better road signs, proper guardrails, anything to prevent another tragedy. Eventually, they got some improvements. Better signage, reflective markers, a few safety upgrades. But apparently, something else had taken notice too. Monday's run was normal, no crossing guard, no safety patrol. I was almost relieved, thinking maybe whatever was happening had run its course. But Tuesday brought something new and even more unsettling. As I approached Miller's Curve, I saw construction equipment operated by more of the tall figures. They were installing actual road signs, not makeshift or improvised equipment, but professional-grade safety installations. New reflective warning signs, proper guardrails, improved lighting systems for the curve. The work was better quality than anything the county usually installed, completed with impossible efficiency. These creatures, whatever they were doing in hours what should have taken a professional road crew days to accomplish. Wednesday brought the final encounter. The original crossing guard appeared one last time, but now it was wearing a reflective sash across its chest that read, "Safety Patrol," in bold letters. When I drove past, it gave me a formal salute, and I noticed something I hadn't seen before. It was smiling. A wide, proud expression that somehow managed to look both inhuman and deeply satisfied, like someone who'd completed an important job. I never saw the crossing guard or its crew again after that week. But Miller's Curve became the safest section of my entire route. The safety improvements they'd installed have prevented at least 3 accidents that I know of, times when bad weather or distracted drivers should have resulted in vehicles going off the road. Instead, the new guardrails and warning systems kept everyone safe. Sometimes, during heavy rain or snow, I catch glimpses of orange safety vests in the forest along that stretch of road. Never clear enough to be sure, just flashes of reflective material moving between the trees. But those glimpses always come during the worst driving conditions, times when extra caution is most needed. The county inspector couldn't explain who had done the professional safety work on Miller's Curve or where the expensive equipment had come from. No invoices, no work orders, no record of any approved construction. The improvements just appeared, installed to specifications that exceeded county standards. I've been driving that route for 3 years since the encounters ended, and Copper Creek Road has had 0 accidents. Not a single fender bender, not even a close call. Those entities may have been inhuman, but they understood something about protection and safety that made them more dedicated than most people I've worked with. Looking back now, I think they were the spirits of those children and their driver from 1987, still trying to make that dangerous curve safer for everyone who came after them. Sarah Henderson and her 23 kids transformed into something that could actually do what the county should have done decades ago. Make that road safe for the children who had to travel it every day. I still drive Route 15, still pick up kids from the same farms and hollows. But now when I come around Miller's Curve, I always slow down a little extra and say a quiet thank you to whoever might be watching from the forest. Those orange safety vests in the trees remind me that sometimes protection comes from the most unexpected places, and the people who care most about keeping children safe aren't always the ones you'd expect. I'm 45 years old, and I've been farming the same piece of land in eastern Kentucky my whole adult life. My great-grandfather bought this property back in the 1942. 200 acres of good soil, nestled in a valley between 2 forested ridges, about an hour outside of Paintsville. 4 generations of Johnson men have worked this land, growing mostly corn and tobacco, and until last October, I thought I understood everything there was to know about these fields. My wife Sarah and I have 3 kids. Emma's 16, Tyler's 14, and little Hannah just turned 10. This farm isn't just our livelihood, it's our heritage, our identity. Every morning, I wake up looking out at the same hills my great-grandfather saw, working soil that's been in our family for 80 years. The land itself sits in what the old-timers call a pocket valley, completely surrounded by dense hardwood forest that climbs up into the Appalachian foothills. There's only one road in and out, a gravel lane, that connects to the county highway about 3 miles down the mountain. Our nearest neighbor is the Hendricks family, and their property line is a good half-mile away through thick timber. In all the years I've lived here, I've never felt isolated or unsafe. These mountains have been home to my family since before I was born, and I've always felt like the land. And I had an understanding. I take care of it, and it takes care of us. Growing up here, I learned the rhythms of farming from my daddy, just like he learned from his daddy. Spring planting, summer cultivation, fall harvest, winter planning. It's a cycle that's been the same for generations. Predictable as sunrise. Sarah and I met in high school, and she moved to the farm right after we got married. The kids were born here, learned to walk in these fields, helped with chores since they could barely hold a bucket. Emma's already talking about agricultural college, wants to modernize our operation with GPS-guided tractors and soil sensors. Tyler's more interested in the forestry side. He knows every trail and creek in the surrounding woods. Hannah just loves the animals, spends hours in the barn talking to the chickens and goats like they're her best friends. Our farm runs on a pretty simple schedule. We typically start corn harvest in mid-October, right when the moisture content drops to where we need it for storage. I've got a John Deere combine harvester that's served us well for 12 years, and during harvest season, I'm usually in the fields from dawn until well past dusk. Sarah handles the books and manages our small roadside stand, where we sell sweet corn, tomatoes, and Sarah's famous apple butter to folks driving up from the valley. The kids help after school and on weekends, though mostly they complain about missing time with their friends. It's honest work, hard work, but it's ours. October 12th started like any other harvest day. I was up at 5:30, had coffee with Sarah while she packed my lunch, and was walking out to fire up the combine by 6. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, low humidity, no wind to speak of. The corn in our far field, the one that backs up against the tree line on the eastern ridge, was ready. I'd been checking the moisture levels for a week, and everything looked ideal for harvesting. I remember feeling good that morning, maybe even a little proud. The corn had come in better than expected despite a dry spell in August. Walking through the field in the pre-dawn darkness, my flashlight beam showing row after row of healthy, mature stalks, I was thinking about how this might be our best yield in 5 years. The ears were full and heavy, the stalks standing straight and strong. I'd been farming long enough to recognize when everything was going right, and that morning, everything felt right. By 8 a.m., I was well into the far field, working methodically through the rows closest to the forest edge. The combine was running, smooth and steady, the grain tank filling at a good pace. The morning was warming up nicely, probably heading towards 70 degrees, and I had the cab windows open to let in the fresh air. I could hear birds calling from the woods, see squirrels running along the fence line that separated our property from the national forest land. Just another peaceful October morning in eastern Kentucky. That's when my equipment started acting up. First, it was just the GPS going haywire. The screen that usually showed my exact position and the field boundaries started displaying coordinates that made no sense, like I was somehow farming in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. I figured it was just a satellite glitch and switched to manual navigation. But then the engine started sputtering, losing power every few seconds like it was running on bad fuel. I'd just filled the tank that morning with diesel from our on-farm storage, same fuel I'd been using all season without any problems. I shut down the combine and climbed out to check under the hood. Everything looked normal, belts tight, fluid levels good, no obvious mechanical issues. But that's when I noticed how quiet everything had gotten. The birds I'd been hearing all morning had gone completely silent. No insects buzzing, no wind rustling through the corn stalks. Even the distant sound of traffic on the county highway had disappeared. It was the kind of absolute silence that makes your ears ring, like the whole world had just stopped breathing. I stood there next to my combine, wrench in hand, listening to nothing. In 30 years of farming, I'd never experienced quiet like that. There's always some kind of sound in the countryside. Wind through trees, birds calling, insects humming, cattle lowing from neighboring farms. But right then, it was like someone had hit a mute button on the entire valley. The hair on my arms started standing up, and I felt that crawling sensation you get when you know someone's watching you. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought maybe it was just a dead tree I'd never noticed before. standing at the edge of my cornfield about 200 yards away. But trees don't shift their weight from foot to foot. Trees don't have broad shoulders and arms that hang down past where knees should be. And trees definitely don't turn their heads to look directly at you when you call out to them. It was massive. Had to be 9 feet tall, maybe more, with a build like nothing I'd ever seen. Its shoulders were broader than any man's, and its arms looked thick as fence posts. The whole thing was covered in what looked like bark or some kind of rough, textured hide that was dark brown and deeply grooved. From that distance, I couldn't make out details of its face, but I could see it was shaped roughly like a human head, just wrong somehow. Too big, too angular, sitting on a neck that was too thick and too long. "Hey!" I called out, my voice sounding strange and flat in the unnatural quiet. "You need something?" The thing turned its head toward me with a sound I'll never forget. Like tree branches grinding against each other in a strong wind, but slower and more deliberate. When it opened its mouth, what came out wasn't exactly a sound. It was more like a vibration that I felt in my chest and stomach, a low rumbling that seemed to come from deep in the earth rather than from any throat. That's when I noticed what was happening to my corn. The stalks around the creature were starting to lean away from it, like they were trying to avoid its presence. Row by row, the corn began bending at impossible angles, creating a clear path through my field that led directly toward where I stood. The stalks weren't breaking or falling over. They were moving deliberately, systematically, like they were being pushed aside by invisible hands. Within minutes, there was a perfectly straight corridor through my cornfield, about 10 feet wide, running from the tree line to my position. I tried to start the combine. The engine turned over once, made a grinding noise, and went completely dead. Not even clicking when I turned the key. I grabbed my cell phone to call Sarah, but the screen was black and wouldn't respond no matter what buttons I pressed. The battery had been at 70% when I checked it an hour earlier. The creature started walking down the path through my corn. With each step, I could see more details, and every detail made it worse. Its skin wasn't bark at all. It was made of interwoven vines and roots, twisted together so tightly they formed the shape of a man. Small animals hung from its body like gruesome ornaments, dead squirrels, birds, even a raccoon, all of them mummified and perfectly preserved. But as it got closer, maybe 100 yards away now, I realized the animals weren't actually dead. Their eyes were still moving, tracking my movement with a desperate awareness that made my stomach turn. Where the creature stepped, my healthy corn stalks withered and turned black. Not slowly, like plants dying from disease, but instantly, like someone was painting death across my field with every footfall. The air around it seemed to shimmer, the way heat waves rise from hot pavement, except it was getting cold. I could see my breath starting to fog, even though it was a warm October morning. That's when it spoke. "This harvest belongs to the mountain." The voice was like grinding stone, each word separated by long pauses, as if speaking was difficult or unnatural. It gestured toward my cornfield with one massive hand, fingers thick as tree roots, and instantly, a quarter of my crop began to rot and collapse. Entire rows of corn that had been healthy and strong just moments before turned black and fell over, releasing a smell like fresh grave dirt mixed with rotting vegetation. I've carried a shotgun in my combine for 20 years, standard. Equipment for dealing with groundhogs, coyotes, or the occasional rabid fox. I grabbed it from behind the seat and fired both barrels directly at the thing's chest. The sound of the shots was muffled and strange, like I was shooting into a thick fog. The shells passed right through it like it was made of smoke. It smiled at me, tilting its head with that same grinding branch sound, and said, "Iron cannot harm what feeds the earth." Suddenly, roots erupted from the ground around my feet. They wrapped around my legs, not tight enough to hurt, but strong enough to hold me in place. I could feel them pulsing against my skin, warm and alive, like giant earthworms made of wood. The creature reached into its own chest cavity and pulled out a handful of seeds that glowed with a sickly green light. It scattered them across my field, and wherever they landed, my healthy corn twisted into shapes that shouldn't exist. Some stalks grew faces that opened and closed their mouths in silent screams. Others developed arm-like branches that reached toward the sky like they were begging for help. The ears of corn themselves began to pulse and writhe, transforming into shapes that looked uncomfortably organic, uncomfortably human. "Your family has taken, for 4 generations," the creature declared, its voice getting stronger, more confident. "Now, you give back." It pointed one root finger toward my farmhouse, where I knew Sarah was probably starting her morning chores and the kids were getting ready for school. The thought of this thing anywhere near my family broke something loose inside me, and I pulled free from the roots with pure adrenaline. They gave way easier than I expected, like they were just meant to hold me long enough for the creature to deliver its message. I ran toward the house, screaming for Sarah to get the kids in the car. Behind me, the creature let out a roar that shook the ground and sent every bird within miles into panicked flight. I could hear my combine harvester suddenly roar to life, but when I looked back over my shoulder, it was moving on its own, driverless, its cutting blades spinning as it chased me across the field like some kind of possessed mechanical monster. I reached the house just as Sarah was coming out the back door, having heard the unholy sound from the field. The kids were right behind her, Tyler carrying Hannah while Emma grabbed our emergency bag from the hall closet, something we'd practiced for tornado warnings, never thinking we'd need it for anything like this. "Get in the truck," I yelled, not stopping to explain. Sarah took one look at my face and didn't ask questions. We all piled into our Ford F-150, and I gunned it down our gravel driveway like the devil himself was chasing us. Looking back in my mirrors, I could see the creature standing in our yard, surrounded by our farm equipment that had somehow come to life. Our tractor was plowing perfect circles around the house, while our front-end loader was digging holes in what used to be Sarah's vegetable garden. The creature stood perfectly still in the center of it all, watching us drive away. We went straight to my brother's house in town and stayed there for 3 days before I worked up the courage to call the sheriff. When we came back with Deputy Collins the next morning, everything was normal. Too normal. My cornfield looked perfect, not a single stalk out of place, no sign of the withered and twisted plants I'd seen. The soil tested richer than Collins had ever seen in 30 years of police work in these mountains. "Whatever you thought you saw, Marcus," he told me, "it sure didn't hurt your crops any." Over the following weeks, our farm became the talk of the county. Our corn yield was 3 times what we'd ever harvested before. Agricultural extension agents came out to study our revolutionary farming methods. Neighbors stopped by constantly, wanting to know our teat. The local newspaper ran a feature story about the Johnson family's miracle harvest. But I knew the price. Every night, I could hear the creature moving through our fields. Not the grinding, deliberate footsteps from that first encounter, but something quieter, more careful. The sound of someone, or something, tending a garden with infinite patience. Our motion-activated security lights would flicker on and off in patterns that moved across our property, like someone was walking the fence line, checking the boundaries. Hannah started sleepwalking. We'd find her in the morning, standing in the middle of our cornfield, dirt under her fingernails and green stains on her pajamas. When we asked her about it, she said she was helping the plants grow, but couldn't remember anything else. Tyler began talking about voices in the woods, saying the trees were whispering to him in a language he almost understood. Emma's college plans changed. Instead of agricultural science, she became obsessed with studying plant mythology and ancient farming rituals. Sarah found seeds in her kitchen garden that we'd never planted. They grew into vegetables with faces, tomatoes that looked like tiny human heads, squash that resembled sleeping children. We stopped eating anything we grew ourselves, but the plants kept thriving whether we tended them or not. We sold the farm 6 months later and moved to a small house in Paintsville. The real estate agent said it was the easiest sale she'd ever handled. The new owner, a young couple from Ohio looking for a sustainable farming opportunity, didn't even want to negotiate the price after seeing our soil test results. But the creature's influence followed us to town. Everything we plant, even simple houseplants in pots, grows too fast, too healthy, too strange. Sarah's attempted herb garden behind our rental house produced basil leaves, the size of dinner plates, and mint that grew in spirals around. Hannah still talks to plants like they're people, and they respond by turning toward her voice and growing toward her hands. The new owner of our farm calls us every few months to update us on his incredible success. Record harvests, soil that seems to regenerate itself overnight, crops that practically grow themselves. He always mentions seeing a helpful scarecrow that moves between his fields at night, making sure everything is properly tended. He thinks it's wonderful, having such dedicated help. I drive by the old place sometimes, usually in the daylight, never stopping. The corn grows in perfect rows, more organized and healthy than anything I ever managed in 20 years of farming. The farmhouse looks well maintained, the equipment clean and properly stored. It looks like paradise, like every farmer's dream of what their land could be. But I know the truth. We took from that mountain for 4 generations, and now we're part of its eternal harvest. The creature doesn't want to hurt us. It wants to use us, to make us part of something older and stranger than anything human beings were meant to understand. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about that moment when it looked directly at me and said my family belonged to the mountain. I realize now it wasn't making a threat. It was just telling me a fact, like saying the sun rises in the east or water flows downhill. We belong to the mountain now. We always would. And honestly, looking at how our lives have changed, how successful everything we touch becomes, how healthy our children are despite their strange new behaviors, I'm not entirely sure that's a bad thing. But I am sure it's permanent, and I'm sure there's no going back to whatever normal used to mean. The Harvest Guardian got what it wanted. We're all tending its garden now, whether we know it or not. I'm 24 years old and work the night shift at a Shell station on Route 23 inches eastern Kentucky. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills while I save up for mechanic school. The job keeps me busy from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., mostly serving truckers and coal miners heading up into the mountains. Our station sits right at the intersection where Laurel Creek Road branches off the main highway and winds up into the hills for about 15 miles. Most folks around here know better than to head up that way after dark. But truckers passing through don't always know the local customs. I'd been working there about 8 months when this all happened. The night shift suited me fine. I've always been more of a night owl anyway, and the pay was decent enough that I could sock away a couple $100 each month for school. My manager, Bill, was pretty laid back about things, as long as I kept the place clean and didn't let anyone rob us. The biggest excitement we usually got was when old Pete Morrison would come in around 2 a.m., 3 sheets to the wind, trying to buy more beer with a pocket full of change. The station itself was pretty typical. Fluorescent lights that hummed constantly, a coffee maker that had seen better days, and security cameras that recorded everything in grainy black and white. We had the usual setup: gas pumps out front, a small convenience store section inside with overpriced snacks and drinks, and a little office area behind the counter where I could watch Netflix on my phone during the quiet hours. Bill had installed a decent security system after we got robbed about 2 years back, so I always felt pretty safe working alone. October 3rd started out like any other Thursday night. I clocked in at 10, restocked the coolers, and settled in for what I expected to be another quiet shift. The first few hours went by normally. A couple of truckers stopped for coffee and diesel, and I sold some cigarettes to Janet Mullins on her way home from my chew. Her waitressing job at the diner. Around midnight, things usually died down completely until the early morning shift change at the mine. That's when this guy walked in, wearing full hunting gear. Camouflage jacket, orange vest, the works. He looked to be in his 40s, average height, with dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. Nothing unusual about that during hunting season, and plenty of folks head up Laurel Creek to hunt the back ridges. What struck me as odd was how he moved. Most hunters who come in late at night are either tired from a long day or a little drunk from celebrating a good hunt. This guy moved with this weird, fluid precision, like every step was carefully calculated. "Evening," he said, walking up to the counter. "I'm looking for directions to the Whitman hunting camp up Laurel Creek. You know where that might be?" I'd lived in the area my whole life and knew most of the hunting camps up that way, but I'd never heard of any Whitman camp. Still, new camps get established all the time, and I figured maybe it was just something I hadn't come across yet. "Can't say I know that particular one," I told him. "But Laurel Creek Road will take you up into the mountains. Most of the camps are anywhere from 5 to 12 miles up, branching off onto the old logging roads." He nodded and grabbed a coffee from the machine, then picked up a bag of beef jerky. "Much obliged," he said, paying with exact change. His movements at the register were strange too smooth, like he was performing actions he'd practiced but didn't quite understand the purpose of. After he left, I watched through the window to see which direction he headed, but I never saw him get into a vehicle. 1 second, he was walking out of the store. The next, he'd just disappeared into the darkness toward the mountain road. I figured maybe he'd parked around back or down the road a bit, but it still struck me as weird. About an hour later, around 1 a.m., the same guy walked back into the store. Same hunting clothes, same beard, same everything. He walked up to the counter with that same unnaturally fluid movement and said, "Evening. I'm looking for directions to the Whitman hunting camp up Laurel Creek. You know where that might be?" I stared at him for a second, confused. "Didn't I just see you about an hour ago? I told you to take Laurel Creek Road up into the mountains." He looked genuinely puzzled, tilting his head slightly. "I'm sorry, but I've never been in this store before. This is my first time here." The voice was identical, the face was exactly the same, but something about how he held himself was different. Where the first guy had moved too smoothly, this one seemed stiff, like he was concentrating on each movement. Like he was learning how to operate his own body. "Are you sure?" I pressed. "Because you bought coffee and beef jerky, asked about the same hunting camp, you were wearing those exact same clothes." He looked down at himself, then back at me with what appeared to be genuine confusion. "I don't know what to tell you, son. I just drove up from Lexington tonight, and this is the first place I've stopped. I wanted to check our security cameras to prove my point, but I didn't want to seem crazy if I was somehow mistaken. Instead, I gave him the same directions about Laurel Creek Road, and he bought the same items, coffee and beef jerky, paying with exact change. After he left, I immediately went to check the camera monitor behind the counter. The footage showed him arriving both times clear as day, but there was something wrong with the image. Around his figure, the video seemed distorted, like looking at someone through water. The timestamp clearly showed both visits an hour apart, but the distortion made it hard to make out details about his face or movements. I tried to shake it off and get back to my normal routine, but I couldn't stop thinking about how identical the two visits had been. Same questions, same purchases, same exact change. It felt rehearsed, like someone practicing a scene until they got it right. At 2:30 a.m., he came back for a third time. This time, I noticed immediately that something was wrong with his proportions. His arms seemed slightly too long for his torso, and his head was tilted at an odd angle, like his neck wasn't quite supporting it properly. When he spoke, asking about the same hunting camp with the same words, there was an echo to his voice that shouldn't have been possible in the small store. "Evening. I'm looking for directions to the Whitman hunting camp up Laurel Creek. You know where that might be?" But now it sounded like multiple people speaking in perfect unison, just slightly out of sync enough to create that eerie echo effect. I watched him more carefully this time, pretending to think about his question while studying his movements. That's when I noticed his reflection in the store window, behind him. The reflection was moving about half a second behind his actual body, like it was trying to keep up but couldn't quite match the timing. When he reached for his wallet to pay for the same coffee and beef jerky, I saw his fingers bend in ways that human joints simply don't allow. Not broken or injured, just wrong, like they had too many knuckles or the bones were made of something flexible. "You know," I said, my voice coming out a little shakier than I intended, "the mountains can be pretty dangerous at night. Lots of folks get lost up there in the dark. Maybe you should wait until morning, get a fresh start." He smiled then, and his teeth were too white and too sharp. Not like fangs or anything dramatic, just wrong in that same subtle way everything else about him was wrong. "That's kind of you to worry," he said, "but I'm very good at hunting in the dark." After he left, I immediately called my manager's emergency number, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried explaining about the weird customer, but when I went to check the security cameras for evidence, there was no record of his third visit. The timestamp jumped from 2:15 to 2:45 with no footage in between, like that 15 minutes had just been erased. Around 4 a.m., I saw him again through the store window. He was standing under one of the parking lot lights, perfectly still. But his back was to me, facing away from the store, while his head was turned completely around to stare directly at me through the glass. His neck had rotated 180 degrees like an owl's, but his body hadn't moved at all. I locked both the front and back doors and called 911. Deputy Martinez arrived about 20 minutes later, but by then the parking lot was empty. I tried explaining what I'd seen, but I could tell from his expression that he thought I was either drunk or having some kind of breakdown. He took a look around the property, checked that all the doors and windows were secure, and suggested I might want to consider switching to day shift if the night work was getting to me. The next night, Friday, I seriously considered calling in sick. But I needed the money, and part of me wanted to see if anything else would happen. I kept telling myself it had to have been some kind of elaborate prank, or maybe I'd been more tired than I realized and was seeing things. At exactly midnight, the same guy walked through the door. "Evening," he said with that same fluid movement and echoing voice. "I'm looking for directions to the Whitman hunting camp, up Laurel Creek. You know where that might be?" But this time, I noticed he was wearing my clothes. The exact same blue flannel shirt and Levi's jeans I'd worn to work the night before. Clothes that were sitting in my dirty laundry basket at home. Even the small tear near the left pocket that I'd gotten catching my shirt on a fence post last week. "Those are my clothes," I said, backing away from the pros counter. He looked down at himself with what appeared to be genuine surprise, like he hadn't noticed what he was wearing until I pointed it out. As I watched, his face began to shift slightly. His nose became more like mine, his eyes changed to the same brown color as mine, his hairline moved to match my receding hair at the temples. By the time I'd backed up against the far wall, I was looking at a perfect copy of myself, down to the small scar on my chin from a childhood accident. The thing that looked exactly like me smiled with my own face and said in my own voice, "I think I'm getting better at this. Do you mind if I practice?" It started moving the way I move, copying my habit of tapping my fingers when nervous, the way I shift my weight from one foot to the other when I'm thinking. Every gesture, every mannerism was perfectly replicated. I grabbed the baseball bat Bill kept behind the counter for emergencies, but the thing just laughed, with my own laugh, and walked out of the store like nothing had happened. Saturday night, I convinced my friend Mike to come stay with me for the shift. Mike's a big guy, played football in high school, and I figured having backup wouldn't hurt. I told him some story about weird customers and possible drug addicts, not the whole truth because I knew he'd think I was losing my mind. We made it to midnight with no incidents. Mike was starting to give me grief about dragging him out for nothing when, around 2 a.m., we both saw someone walking past the windows outside, someone who looked exactly like Mike. The Mike copy pressed his face against the glass and waved at us with an exaggerated, theatrical gesture. The real Mike was standing right next to me, and we both watched in stunned silence as his perfect double mouthed the words, "I'm getting better at this," before disappearing back into the darkness. "What the hell was that?" Mike whispered. I didn't have an answer for him. Sunday night, I worked alone again. Part of me hoped that bringing Mike had somehow broken whatever was happening, but I think I already knew better. At exactly midnight, I walked into my own store. Two identical versions of Jake Morrison stood there staring at each other across the counter. The copy was perfect in every detail. Same height, same weight, same clothes, same tired expression from working too many night shifts. The only difference was the eyes. Where my eyes were brown, his were completely black. Not just the iris or pupil, but the entire visible part was solid, depthless black. "I've been practicing," it said with my voice. "I think I'm ready to take over now." "Take over what?" I managed to ask. "Your life," it said matter-of-factly. "I'm tired of living in the mountains. It gets lonely up there, watching people from a distance, learning how to be human. I'd like to try actually living a human life for a while. Working a job, having friends, maybe dating someone." It talked about my life like it was a jacket it wanted to try on. "What happens to me?" I asked. "You can go back to the mountains where I came from. It's not so bad once you get used to it. Quiet, peaceful, lots of time to think." When I shook my head, refusing, it looked genuinely disappointed. "That's unfortunate," it said. "I was really hoping you'd cooperate. It would make this so much easier." The copy reached up and started peeling off its face like a rubber mask. Underneath was something gray and shapeless, like wet clay that kept moving and reshaping itself. Those same solid black eyes floated on the surface, but there were more of them now. Dozens of black spots that opened and closed like breathing. "I guess I'll have to do this the hard way," it said, and lunged across the counter toward me. I swung the baseball bat, but it passed right through the creature's body like hitting thick mud. The thing wrapped around me like liquid, and I could feel it, studying my body, learning my exact shape and weight and temperature. It was cold and sticky, and everywhere it touched felt like my skin was being measured and catalogued. I managed to break free and run for the door, but it followed, somehow maintaining my appearance, even as it moved like flowing water. I dove into my pickup truck and peeled out of the parking lot, driving straight for the sheriff's station in town. But when I tried to explain what had happened to the night deputy, they pulled up our security footage and showed me video of myself working normally all night. No strange customers, no identical copies, no attacks, just me stocking shelves, reading something on my phone, and then suddenly running out of the store for no apparent reason. I quit that job the following week, told Bill I was moving back in with my parents and looking for day work. He was understanding about it, said the night shift wasn't for everyone, and that he'd noticed I'd been acting a little strange lately. That was 3 months ago. I'm working construction now, day shift only, and I've been saving money faster than I expected. Sometimes I see perfect copies of myself around town. One works at the grocery store, another one was at the DMV when I went to renew my license. They're living completely different lives, and everyone treats them like they've always been there. The weird thing is, I'm never completely sure anymore if I'm the real Jake Morrison, or if I'm just another copy that thinks it's the original. Sometimes I catch myself moving in ways that don't feel quite right, or I'll say something and wonder where those words came from. I avoid mirrors when I can, because sometimes my reflection seems to move just a split second behind what I'm actually doing. I've never driven past that Shell station again, and I definitely never go up Laurel Creek Road. Whatever that thing was, I think it got what it wanted, eventually. I just hope the real me, whichever one that is doing okay wherever he ended up. I'm 67 years old, and most folks would probably tell you I should have hung up my hiking boots years ago. Been retired from the Postal Service for about 7 years now, put in my 40 years delivering mail through every holler and back road in eastern Tennessee. My late wife Margaret used to say I knew these mountains better than the deer that lived in them, and I guess she wasn't wrong. After she passed 5 years back, I took up bird photography to keep myself busy. Sounds like an old man's hobby, I know, but there's something peaceful about sitting in the woods before dawn, waiting for that perfect shot of a cardinal or a blue jay going about their morning routine. Margaret always worried about me hiking alone at my age, especially in winter when the trails get icy and the daylight's short. "Robert," she'd say, "what if you fall and break something out there? What if you have one of your heart episodes?" I'd always promised to stick to the easy trails, the ones close to parking, areas where other folks might come by. But truth is, the best birds don't hang around where people are making noise. You want to photograph something special, something most people never get to see, you've got to go where they live. That's how I ended up in Pine Hollow last December. I'd been talking to some other bird photographers online, and one fellow from North Carolina mentioned spotting a rare winter warbler up there, something called a Townsend's warbler that's not supposed to be anywhere near Tennessee. He'd posted some blurry photos on the birding forum, and I'll admit, my curiosity got the better of me. After 40 years of walking these mountains, I figured I could handle one more adventure. Pine Hollow was about 30 miles from my house, right near the North Carolina border, in an area I'd delivered mail to back in the day but hadn't visited in probably 15 years. The place had always been remote, even by mountain standards. Most of the old families had moved away when the logging company pulled out in the 90s, leaving behind empty cabins and overgrown roads. The few folks who stayed were the kind who liked their privacy and didn't much care for visitors. I remembered dropping off welfare checks and Social Security payments to mailboxes at the end of long dirt driveways, never seeing the people who lived back in there. Margaret used to joke that Pine Hollow was where people went when they wanted to disappear from the world entirely. I'd been planning the trip for about a week, checking weather reports and studying topographical maps. The forecast called for light snow, nothing too serious, and I figured an early morning hike would get me to the ridge overlooking the hollow right around sunrise. That's prime time for bird photography. The light's soft, the air's still, and most species are active, looking for their first meal of the day. I loaded up my Toyota pickup with my camera gear, my portable blind, and a thermos of coffee, strong enough to wake the dead. Left the house at 4:30 in the morning on December 15th, driving through a gentle snowfall that made the whole world look clean and peaceful. The access road to Pine Hollow was worse than I remembered. 25 years of neglect had left it full of potholes and washouts, barely wide enough for one vehicle. My truck's headlights cut through the falling snow, illuminating dense walls of pine trees on both sides that seemed to lean in toward the road like they were trying to close it off completely. I'd driven mountain roads my whole life, but something about this one felt different. Too quiet, maybe. Usually you'd hear an owl or see a deer in your headlights, but the forest felt empty, like everything with sense had found somewhere else to be. I parked at a small clearing where the road dead-ended, same spot where I used to turn my mail truck around all those years ago. The silence hit me as soon as I shut off the engine. No wind in the trees, no night sounds, just the soft whisper of snow falling on pine needles. I sat there for a moment, checking my equipment and trying to shake off the odd feeling that had been growing in my chest during the drive. Probably just nerves, I told myself. First time hiking alone in a new area, older than I used to be, missing Margaret's voice telling me to be careful. The trail to the ridge was about half a mile through fairly dense forest, marked with old blazes that were barely visible in my flashlight beam. I'd studied the route on my maps, but walking it in the dark with snow starting to accumulate was trickier than I'd expected. The path wound upward through stands of pine and hemlock, so thick they blocked out most of the sky, creating a tunnel effect that made my light seem weak and inadequate. Every few minutes, I'd stop to check my compass and listen for any sounds that might indicate I was getting close to the overlook. About 20 minutes into the hike, I started noticing something strange. The snow was falling steadily, but it wasn't accumulating on the trail the way it should have been. Where I'd walked, my footprints were clear in about an inch of fresh powder. But ahead of me, the path looked like it had been swept clean, like someone or something had been walking it recently enough to keep the snow from sticking. I told myself it was probably deer or maybe a park ranger doing an early morning patrol, but I'd been walking these mountains long enough to know what animal tracks looked like, and this wasn't that. When I finally reached the ridge around 6 in the morning, dawn was just starting to break through the overcast sky. The overlook gave me a perfect view down into Pine Hollow, a deep valley surrounded by steep ridges covered in old-growth forest. It was beautiful in that stark, winter way that makes you understand why people used to believe these mountains were haunted. I set up my portable blind about 20 feet back from the edge, arranged my camera equipment, and settled in to wait for the light to get better and the birds to start moving. That's when I heard the first sound that made my skin crawl. Not exactly footsteps, but something heavy moving through the trees behind me, too deliberate to be an animal foraging for food. I turned around slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements that might scare off whatever bird I was here to photograph. And that's when I saw it through my telephoto lens. About 100 yards away, standing perfectly motionless behind a large pine tree, was something I still don't have words for. It looked human from a distance, but the proportions were all wrong. Too tall, maybe 8 feet, with arms that hung down almost to the ground. Its skin had a grayish color that made it blend in with the tree bark, and it stood so still, I almost convinced myself it was just a trick of the early morning light and shadows. But then I saw another one, and another. As my eyes adjusted and I scanned the tree line more carefully, I realized there were at least a dozen of these things positioned in a wide circle around where I was sitting. All of them the same impossible height, all of them standing with that unnatural stillness, all of them facing in my direction. They weren't moving, weren't making any sound, but I could feel their attention focused on me with an intensity that made every hair on my neck stand up. I started taking pictures, thinking this was the discovery of a lifetime. Whatever these things were, I was going to document them properly. But my camera kept malfunctioning in ways that made no sense. The autofocus wouldn't lock on, the shutter would lag for several seconds before firing, and the images on my LCD screen looked blurry and distorted. I tried my backup camera and got the same problems, like something was interfering with the electronics. While I was fumbling with my equipment, the creatures started moving closer. Not walking exactly, but gliding forward with a movement so smooth it didn't seem possible on the rough, uneven ground. They never made a sound, not even the crunch of snow under their feet, but I could sense them tightening the circle around my position. By 6:30, they had formed a ring about 50 feet away from me, all of them staring with large, dark eyes that reflected the pale dawn light like mirrors. One of them stepped forward from the group and made a gesture with its elongated arm, pointing directly at my camera equipment. That's when I realized these things weren't just watching me randomly. They were studying my behavior, trying to understand what I was doing with all the gear I'd brought. Another one approached from behind, moving so quietly I didn't notice until it was close enough to gently touch my camera bag with fingers that were too long and ended in what looked like black claws. I should have been terrified, should have run screaming back to my truck. But there was something almost gentle about their curiosity, like they meant no harm but were genuinely puzzled by this old man who'd come into their territory, carrying strange objects and pointing them around. For nearly an hour, they examined my equipment while I sat perfectly still, feeling like a specimen being studied by alien scientists. One of the creatures picked up my extra telephoto lens and held it up to its eye, trying to understand how it worked. Another found my thermos of coffee and opened it carefully, sniffing the contents with what appeared to be complete confusion. They communicated with each other through subtle hand gestures and very soft clicking sounds that I could barely hear, like they were discussing what they'd discovered and what it might mean. Around 8 o'clock, as the sun rose higher and the forest started to brighten, they began backing away from me, still watching but returning to their positions behind the trees. The last one to leave dropped, something at my feet, a piece of carved wood about the size of my palm, covered in intricate symbols that I didn't recognize but somehow looked familiar, like something I'd seen in dreams. By 8:30, they had all disappeared back into the forest, leaving me alone with my malfunctioning cameras and a head full of questions that I knew no one would ever believe. I hiked back to my truck as quickly as my old legs would carry me, my hands shaking as I loaded my equipment, but I felt more amazed than frightened. What I'd experienced was impossible, but it had happened, and I had the carved wooden piece as proof. When I got home and tried to develop my photos, every single image was perfectly clear except for the shots I'd taken of the creatures. Those showed nothing but empty forest, as if whatever I'd photographed didn't register on camera sensors. But the carved wooden piece remained in my pocket, warm to the touch and covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change when I looked at them directly. Over the following weeks, I returned to Pine Hollow 3 more times, always before dawn, always hoping to see them again. But the creatures never appeared, though sometimes I'd catch glimpses of tall figures in my peripheral vision, just at the edge of sight. Other bird photographers I contacted said they'd heard stories about the Watchers in that area, going back generations, but no one had ever gotten proof of their existence. Local Cherokee elders I spoke to just smiled when I described what I'd seen and told me that some things were meant to stay hidden, that the old mountains held secrets that weren't for modern people to understand. My daughter thinks I'm getting senile and imagined the whole thing, but the wooden carving sits on my mantle as evidence that something extraordinary happened to me in those woods. 6 months after my encounter, I was diagnosed with a rare form of prostate cancer that doctors said should have been detected 2 years earlier during routine exams. During treatment, I noticed that the carved wood piece would grow warm whenever I was near medical equipment. CAT scan machines, radiation therapy devices, even digital thermometers. My cancer went into unexpected remission after only 3 months of treatment, baffling my oncologist who couldn't explain the sudden improvement in my condition. I've started leaving small gifts at Pine Hollow every few weeks. Rolls of film, batteries, small pieces of technology that might interest curious minds. When I return the next day, the gifts are always gone and something new is left in their place. Sometimes it's another wooden carving, sometimes a perfectly polished stone, and once it was a bird feather from a species that doesn't exist anywhere in Tennessee, according to field guides. I think the Watchers were trying to understand our world, studying human behavior and technology the way scientists might observe animals in their natural habitat. Somehow, my cooperation during that first encounter earned their protection, or maybe their gratitude. My wife's been gone 5 years now, but lately I've been feeling like she's watching over me again, like those creatures in the forest somehow connected me to something larger than myself. I still go to Pine Hollow every few weeks, and sometimes I catch glimpses of tall figures in my peripheral vision, standing just far enough back in the tree line that I can't be sure they're really there. They don't approach anymore, but I know they're continuing their study of human behavior, patient observers from a world we don't understand. My cancer has been in remission for 2 years now, far longer than doctors predicted, and I feel stronger and more alert than I have in decades. I've started teaching my grandson about bird photography, sharing my knowledge of the mountains and the creatures that live in them. But I won't take him to Pine Hollow. That place is meant for old souls who can appreciate mysteries without trying to solve them. The carved wooden piece has been growing warm again recently, and I think the watchers are trying to tell me something important. I'm 67 years old, I've seen things most people wouldn't believe, and I'm grateful for every day I've been given since that morning in the hollow. When my time comes, I hope the watchers will be there to guide me to whatever comes next, the way they've been watching over me ever since I showed them respect in their ancient territory. Looking back now, I think that encounter changed everything about how I see the world. These mountains are older than our civilization, and they hold secrets that we're only beginning to glimpse. The watchers have been here longer than we have, and they'll be here long after we're gone, studying and learning and protecting things we don't even know need protection. My name's Jennifer Walsh, and I was 34 when I learned that some things in the mountains aren't meant to be studied. I'd been teaching middle school science for over a decade, and I genuinely believed that hands-on learning beat textbooks every time. That confidence led me to start summer camping programs where I'd take kids into remote areas to study wildlife and conservation. After what happened in the Daniel Boone National Forest, I don't take students anywhere more isolated than the local park anymore. For 5 years, every July, I'd load up a van with eager kids from my environmental science club and head to eastern Kentucky. These weren't troublemakers or kids forced into summer school. These were the ones who actually volunteered to spend part of their vacation identifying bird species and learning about forest ecosystems. The parents loved it because their children came back with genuine enthusiasm for nature. I loved seeing them make connections between classroom, theory, and the real world. That summer, I had 8 students signed up, good kids, all of them. Alex was 13, one of those naturally curious types who asked detailed questions about everything from soil composition to animal migration patterns. Maya, 14, carried this worn composition notebook everywhere and had already decided she wanted to study marine biology. The others, Kayla, Marcus, Emma, Josh, Sarah, and Tyler, were equally excited about spending 3 days in genuine wilderness. I'd chosen a remote section of the Red River Gorge for our base camp, about 45 minutes hike from the nearest maintained trail. I'd scouted it the previous summer and found it perfect, close enough to water sources for safety, but isolated enough that the kids could experience real wilderness without distractions. The area had old-growth forest sections, limestone cliff formations, and enough biodiversity to keep us busy for weeks. The night before we left, I remember checking our equipment one final time. GPS units, first aid supplies, emergency radio, detailed topographical maps. I was thorough about safety because I knew how quickly things could go wrong in remote areas. Looking back, none of that preparation mattered. You can't prepare for something that shouldn't exist. July 15th, our second day, started perfectly. We'd spent the morning tracking deer trails and documenting signs of various mammals. The kids were fascinated by how much you could learn about animal behavior just from examining tracks and feeding patterns. After lunch, we worked on water quality testing in a nearby creek, measuring pH levels, and identifying aquatic insects as environmental indicators. By evening, we'd cataloged 17 different bird species and collected samples of 5 types of moss for microscopic examination back at school. The students were meticulous, taking photographs and making detailed sketches. Everything felt routine, educational, exactly what these trips were supposed to accomplish. Around 9 o'clock, we were sitting around our campfire reviewing the day's observations when we heard the first call. It sounded like a child crying for help, echoing from somewhere deep in the forest about half a mile away. Clear enough that all 8 students immediately looked up from their field notebooks. "Should we go help them?" Alex asked, already standing up. My first instinct was that someone was genuinely in trouble, but something about the cry felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The voice was too clear, too perfectly projected across that distance. In dense forest, sounds get muffled and distorted, especially at night. This cry cut through the darkness with unnatural clarity, like it was being amplified. I pulled out my radio to contact the park rangers. When I described what we'd heard, the dispatcher told me no one had been reported missing, and no other camping permits had been issued for our section. They offered to send someone, but it would be at least 2 hours before anyone could reach us. The crying continued for over an hour, always from the same direction, never moving. If someone was genuinely lost, you'd expect the sound to shift as they searched for our campfire light. This remained perfectly stationary, like it was coming from a fixed position. "Miss Walsh," Maya whispered around 10:30, "there's someone standing over there." I followed her gaze and saw a pale figure about 100 yards out, just at the edge of our flashlight range. It appeared to be a child, maybe 10 years old, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned dress, the kind you'd see in photographs from the early 1900s. "Hello?" I called out, identifying myself as a teacher and asking if they needed help. My voice carried clearly in the still air. But the figure didn't respond. It just stood there, perfectly motionless, while the crying sound continued from the same direction. That's when I realized the crying wasn't coming from the figure we could see. It was coming from something else, deeper in the forest. "Stay close to the fire," I told my students, pulling out my binoculars for a better look. The child's clothes definitely looked historical, a simple dress with long sleeves and button-up boots. But there was something wrong with its posture. No fidgeting, no shifting weight, no normal human micro-movements. It stood with the stillness of a mannequin. Over the next half hour, more pale shapes appeared between the trees. All child-sized, all wearing similar clothing, all standing with that same unnatural stillness. By 11 o'clock, I counted at least a dozen in a loose circle around our campsite. "Miss Walsh?" Maya said quietly, her scientific mind working even through her fear. "They're not breathing. Look, their chests never move." I examined them more carefully through my binoculars and confirmed she was right. No rise and fall of chests, no visible breath vapor in the cooling night air. They were too perfect, too still, like museum displays arranged in the forest. The crying stopped abruptly. One of the child figures began walking toward our campfire. As it approached, I could see its face clearly. Pale, white skin that looked almost translucent, dark, hollow eyes that reflected our firelight like an animal's would, and a mouth that didn't quite close properly, as if the jaw mechanism was broken. It moved with an unnatural gait, each step too deliberate and measured, lacking the natural rhythm of human walking. When it reached about 20 feet from our fire, it spoke in a voice that made my blood freeze. It sounded like several children talking at once, their words overlapping. "Teacher, we want to learn." My students pressed closer behind me as I forced myself to ask, "What do you want to learn?" The thing tilted its head at an impossible angle and pointed at my students with fingers that seemed too long. How to be like them, how to laugh and play and grow. More figures approached, all speaking in that same chorus of overlapping voices. But the questions they asked revealed something fundamentally wrong. How do you make the water come from your eyes? Why does your skin change colors when you are afraid? What makes the warm liquid move through your body? They were studying us like specimens, trying to understand human physiology and behavior, but getting basic details catastrophically wrong. One of them reached out and touched Alex's arm. He later told me it felt like being examined by something that had never encountered warm, living flesh, fingers like cold stone, probing his skin texture and muscle tone with scientific curiosity. Another picked up our field guides and equipment, asking, "How do you use these to understand life?" They handled our notebooks and specimen containers with careful precision, but I noticed that wherever they touched, frost began forming, despite the warm July night. The temperature around our campsite plummeted at least 20 degrees in minutes. Kayla started shivering violently, and I could see everyone's breath misting in the suddenly frigid air. The child figures seemed to grow more solid and lifelike as the temperature dropped, their skin taking on color, their movements becoming more natural. They were feeding on our warmth, our life energy, growing stronger as we grew weaker. "Pack up. Now," I ordered my students, "essential items only. We're leaving." As we hurriedly gathered our most important equipment, I heard them discussing us like laboratory subjects. The tall one protects the smaller ones. They move in groups when threatened. Their heat decreases with fear. This one makes protective sounds. They were cataloging our responses, learning from our terror. The hike back to our vehicles became a nightmare of cosmic proportions. The child figures followed us through the forest, their pale forms visible between the trees, always maintaining the same distance. Our flashlights dimmed despite fresh batteries. My GPS started showing impossible readings, coordinates that placed us in different states, different time zones. The forest itself began changing around us. Familiar landmarks vanished. The trail we'd used that morning seemed to stretch and twist, leading us in directions that defied the topographical maps I'd memorized. Trees appeared where none had been before. The very geography was being rewritten. "Miss Walsh," Tyler whispered, "the stars are wrong." I looked up and felt my sanity crack slightly. The constellation patterns were incorrect, as if we'd been transported to a different hemisphere or a different planet entirely. We stumbled through this alien landscape for what felt like hours, the child figures, always watching, always following, always learning. When we finally reached our vehicles just after midnight, I did a frantic head count to ensure all 8 students were accounted for. As we drove away, I could see the figures standing at the edge of the parking area, their hollow eyes reflecting our taillights like a pack of nocturnal predators. We spent that night in a motel 20 miles away. None of us slept. The students huddled together in one room while I sat by the window, watching for pale shapes that never came. The next morning, park rangers investigated our abandoned campsite and found something that defied explanation. All our remaining equipment had been arranged in complex geometric patterns. Notebooks opened to specific pages about human anatomy, specimen containers organized by size and biological classification, camping gear positioned with mathematical precision. More disturbing was the frost. In July, in Kentucky, our entire campsite was covered in a thick layer of ice that refused to melt even under direct sunlight. The cold spot persisted for over a week, and vegetation in the area died, as if flash frozen. Local historians provided the final piece of the puzzle. In 1952, a one-room schoolhouse had burned down in that exact location during an unusually severe winter storm. 14 children, ages 6 to 12, had been trapped inside when the roof collapsed under snow weight. Their bodies weren't recovered until spring thaw. But here's what the historians didn't tell me, what I learned from old Cherokee tribal records. That land was considered sacred, a place where the boundary between worlds was thin. The schoolhouse had been built there deliberately by settlers who wanted to civilize the area, to impose human order on something that was never meant to be tamed. Those children who died in 1952, they became something else. Not ghosts, not spirits, but students of humanity itself, trapped in an eternal lesson about what it means to be alive. I never returned to remote areas with students. Hell, I barely go into the woods alone anymore. We stick to established parks with ranger stations and reliable cell coverage. The risk isn't worth any educational benefit. But the encounter left permanent marks. 3 of my students from that trip developed abilities that science can't explain. They can predict weather changes days in advance with supernatural accuracy. They understand plant growth patterns and animal behavior in ways that transcend normal learning. Alex started a greenhouse business at 16, claiming plants communicate their needs to him. His success rate with crop yields is so high that agricultural researchers have studied his methods, finding techniques that shouldn't work but somehow do. Maya changed her major from marine biology to botanical research and has already published papers on plant communication that are being cited by graduate-level researchers. Her insights into photosynthesis efficiency have led to breakthroughs in sustainable farming. The others show similar gifts, an intuitive understanding of natural systems that goes far beyond what any textbook could teach. Looking back, I think those child figures did teach us something that night. Not intentionally, they were trying to learn from us, to understand what makes humans human. But in the process of studying us, they infected my students with knowledge from beyond our world. The cost was our innocence. I still wake up in cold sweats, remembering those overlapping voices asking impossible questions. I avoid eastern Kentucky entirely now, and I've developed an irrational fear of children in old-fashioned clothing. The hardest part is knowing they're still out there, still learning, still trying to understand humanity. And somewhere, In the Daniel Boone National Forest, that cursed patch of ground probably still bears the geometric patterns they created, a classroom where the lesson never ends, and the students have become the teachers of something far more terrifying than anything found in textbooks. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder what they learned from us. What knowledge about human nature are they carrying back to whatever realm they inhabit? And I pray that whatever they discovered that night, they never find a way to put it to use. Because if those things ever figure out how to perfectly mimic human behavior, how to walk among us undetected, we'll never know until it's too late. The thought keeps me awake most nights, staring out my bedroom window, searching for pale figures that thankfully never appear. But I know they're watching, I know they're learning, and I know that somewhere in the mountains, the lesson continues.